discussion discovering women and their livelihood journeys around water and waterways. We will be talking about how these women have woven their stories of empowerment, climate action, and agency around water. This is going to be a session celebrating social transformation, highlighting stories involving maritime trade and political prowess, and ecopreneurship. And we're going to talk about two women, one from historical age and one from our present times, and discuss the interface between entrepreneurship, um, agency, and waterways, celebrating water heritage, of course. And I would request any one of you to very briefly, I mean, focus on the story of Harka Bai, or Maria Murzamani as we know her as.
Yeah, so yeah, what we know of Maryam Uzamani, that comes from number of different records, inclusive of the record by Abul Fazl. So we know that she was like Jahangir's mother, and we know that she was one of the first people who married into the Mughal clan, who did not have to convert to Islam, and she was one of the first people who was largely independent, essentially carrying on a number of different activities. Also, she was one of the first people who had the power to grant farmans, which before then was entirely in the domain of the menfolk. So, particularly focusing on maritime trade, we would say that Mariam Zamani or Harkabai, as you say, what she did was she actually focused on something which was like she had a very favorite ship of hers, as you know, which was later captured by the Portuguese. That ship used to ply people over to Mecca. Okay, so she sort of linked one of her business ventures to sort of, you know, with a religious background, as well as employing a certain amount of, you know, what we also think of these days. Maybe she was much ahead of her time. Like, she was also looking at heritage, as well as essentially, more than maritime trade, what she did essentially engendered the exchange of ideas between different cultures, because there were a lot of Muslim people going to Mecca who had never been there before, and who came from very diverse cultures, who had eventually maybe ended up in India. So that was pretty interesting. And what is interesting to note here is that her favorite ship that got captured by the Portuguese, basically, who refused to essentially surrender it back. Um, so what happened out there was, essentially, Mariam was furious at that point of time, and this essentially led to closing down of a number of ports, the chief of, among which was Surat, as we know, and to the Portuguese. And the Portuguese never really had that much of an influence left in northern and western India till about, say, roughly about a couple of hundred years afterwards. So that is, in a nutshell, maybe one of the very interesting stories from the past. Yeah.
So, yeah, absolutely. And also the fact that she was independently wealthy following her
Yes, but we
trade.
must. Yeah, she was independently wealthy, not from a trade essentially, but from the granting of her months. But what she did was, she did have this sort of a business venture which used to essentially take a religious duty and monetize it for a woman uh, who was like basically making money from it, coming from a Hindu Rajput background. And yeah, she was essentially plying that ship. And another thing was that ship used to carry the big picture of the Virgin Mary, basically, and that was sort of like a pass. And even though the Muslims didn't like it, they still went along with it because it granted them free passage. So there are a lot of different cultural aspects to like this particular venture of ours.
Judhajit, who's a technocrat as well, I'd like to place the first question to you as an amateur historian and a professionally qualified academic and trainer in various technology paradigms. Uh, is there a learning that you see in Harkabai's anecdote? Like, does logistics and operations, industrial practices?
Is this particular process of like taking people to Mecca through waters which were controlled by European, well, different European navies at that point of time, via employing a technique which sort of pacified them in the sense that it used to carry a holy Christian symbol. So basically, they would not attack it till the Portuguese did eventually. So yes, of course there were loopholes, but yes, she was. You can say that she was innovative in her thought, and well, even though the basic fact of taking people over to Mecca, that was not really new, but what she did, the way she did it, maybe the sort of safeguards she tried to build into the system, that was sort of unique. And you can also say beyond that, there were a number of different farmans granted. Also, trading farmans were granted by her, which was unprecedented, especially as far as the Mughal Empire was concerned. And even later, we don't see too many such examples of that as far as the Mughal emperors or their consorts were like, if you take them uh, into account. So
Yeah,
that was sort of unique, you can say.
yeah.
But
Of course, you cannot bring 4.0 into a historical perspective. My question was, I mean, in the present context, but
no, even in the present context, what she did was she was not really into automating the processes, or she was not really into, actually, that's why the ship got captured and burned, because even though she was innovative, she was also, like any other Mughal empress, she was sort of a little overconfident when she sort of implemented that particular thing. And there was no real protection, or there were no other treaties with other European nations. I'm not suggesting there should have been, maybe, but there could have been, because other people have done it quite frequently, because people used to go around the Cape of Good Hope and go to Mecca from the other part of the world also. And we even saw people say around say 70 to 80 years before her time to about 100 years before her time. Even then, we can see Moors going from Spain to Mecca, and they used to have some very similar arrangements also. So, but rather than this particular, rather than just carrying a holy symbol, which did protect her ship for quite some time, they would have some very definite alliances with other navies, because it was not that. Also, you can also say that the Spanish Armada, even much before it was known as the Armada, they were pretty strong, because Spain always had an active navy, say from say around after say 900 approximately, essentially to repel Berbers and whatnot. But again, you can sort of give Harkabai the benefit of doubt, because she came from Rajasthan, and well, she wasn't really that familiar with like naval treaties and things like that. But we can say that what she did was initially, at least, due to her and due to even Jahangir, we do see that there was a lot of trade via, even temporary for months, which was not that much seen before. Even though you can also say that it was a continuation of Akbar's policies, but it was sort of interesting.
If I may jump in, I see a different parallel. Since you asked a question about how does it resonate, if I understood your observation question correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, It is if we see any parallel between then and what is happening, if at all anything today,
Yes.
specific to the women folk in today's context, in today's business environment. But before I go there, one parallel I do see, and anybody please feel free to jump in and comment, agree, disagree. I'm throwing a different perspective up in the air, which is I see her. See, I'm not a history student by far, but however, whatever little I have read and understood from whatever we were discussing on this, I see her as an individual in those times. Even if I assume that there was the environment was, how would I say, to an extent conducive because of the emperor and the rules that they were available at that point in time existing. She operated in an environment probably which was somewhat favorable. Draw parallel to a woman manager, on say a manager in a corporate environment today where job description and hierarchy and structures and authority is the environment which provides a defined set of environment of do and don'ts and authorities and responsibilities. Yet some succeed within that and some don't. And probably the reason is that Harkabai then and equivalent lady manager today, Harkabai then probably demonstrated certain qualities of entrepreneurship and leadership to make do what she did as an individual, and probably such qualities as an individual, to whatever extent she succeeded with all her pluses and minuses, she demonstrated probably certain competencies and capabilities as an individual manager, if I may use the word consciously. And the same is probably getting practiced today as an individual manager, where certain individuals demonstrate those abilities and do better than someone else. But
Yeah.
feel free to comment.
Yeah, that's actually very true. But I'd also like to point out that she was defining a lot of the paradigms and defining a lot of things. So when you're trying to do something that innovative, you do make mistakes. So
Absolutely, that's
that
exactly.
but
Absolutely.
if we take what she did in context, we'll see that around 12 to 13 generations after her, her family and that clan particularly, who were not really a very leading clan, they were actually sort of pretty minor before this particular thing happened. And it happened because essentially her father was oppressed by Akbar's brother-in-law. So she sort of turned that around, and her wedding was not really. It was in an army camp, so you can understand that it was not very much what the practice was, and they didn't start out as a very honored clan or anything. But what happened was you would see that around 8 to 10 generations after that, even their family was, or their clan was, engaging in trade essentially due to this very strong statement made by her, or to us due to the series of statements made by her rather. And actually we'll see that even though like Akbar was probably, you can say he was more powerful as an emperor than Jahangir, you can still make this point. And you'll see this pattern if you analyze what she did, that post Akbar's demise, actually Harkabai got more power. So you really can't even say that it was all conducive, and you have to understand that she was essentially an empress who was essentially a Hindu empress in a Mughal family, and Muslims would not like it at that particular point of time, because lines were drawn very clearly at that particular instance, at least.
More the point exactly. So
Yes.
more the reason then that she had to demonstrate, to my
Yeah.
mind, probably certain basic qualities as an individual leader, manager, call it what you like, to be able to achieve whatever she did, to whatever extent she did. And probably that's an equivalent I see that is even carrying forward or is still relevant today. That's my limited point.
Shautrajit, yeah, please feel free to join in.
Yeah, there's a point that I'd like to make in addition to Imagines. If you, yeah, so if you look at the history of the Mughal Empire from Babur, whom you could hardly call an emperor in the true sense of the term, but he was in an expansion mode till the last of his days, to Humayun being routed by the last Sultan of Delhi, if you would have it, it was Sher Shah, and then coming back to the rest of the emperors up to even Roshan Akhtar. Maryam Uzmani was not the Hindu empresses, like you are putting forward. Of course, she was. She was the only Hindu empress, because if you look at Nur Jahan, if you look at Mumtaz Mahal, if you look at the people before, like Humayun's wife, who was a Persian princess, something similar with Humayun's mother. She was the only person who was a Hindu empress who could make her presence felt, and that was also to a certain extent because of the like whatever little strategic IQ she might have had at that point of time. So she made errors because, as very rightly pointed out by Vidharji, she was not used to maritime trade. She was definitely used to trade because a part of the country that she came from, there were as many warriors as they were traders, and the traders belonged not only to like typically what we call the Marwar part of Rajasthan, but they were also directly connected to the Silk Route and the archetypal traders, the Nagar, Sampradaya as we call them, passed through that entire geographical landmass and passed on some of their practices. So yes, it was definitely very innovative. Like whatever mistakes she made, whatever she did, like if she was actually still holding the Hindu card, there was no point that she'd be organizing Hajj. So if she was doing that, she was definitely taking definitely thinking out of the box. That was all I wanted to add for the time.
Yeah, just to make one point, yeah, she was probably the only really Hindu empress, but some other wives of Akbar after her were also not forced to convert to Islam. So that is also there. But yes, you can say that by and large, as an acting empress, because she had control over the harem also, so she used to run that. So yeah, you could say that functionally she was very unique.
Yeah, and another point is that she comes from Rajasthan. I mean, where they're not, she may not have seen the sea uh, ever
No,
in her
actually,
life
Rajasthan
before.
has no. Rajasthan does have uh, connection with the coast, but yes, probably from
She
where she came from,
from yeah.
yeah.
So for her to be, and also, I mean, when she was doing the trading, she couldn't, being inside the Zanana, speak directly to people, and she actually ran a department of traders, middlemen, accountants. It was pretty huge. I mean, almost like a smaller version of the finance department run by Akbar himself. That has been noted. So operations were huge, and she controlled it all herself. So I think I should have mentioned that all four of us, we represent Sustainable Design Research Consortium, a not-for-profit trust, and we mostly work with sustainability and ecology development services, to put it very briefly. And Shugato here, he represents the industry side of it. Shautrajit is a sustainability assurance practitioner. And in one word, I would say that I am a social entrepreneur. Right. So, with that, I mean, before moving on to the next story that we have, which is set in the present context, is there anything that you would like to add to this interface between waterways and women entrepreneurship or livelihood? Um, I mean, before we move on to the next story.
No, not really, except that I think women on empowered women were a reality. I think even from days of Babur or prior to him, while at that time they were not in India, quote unquote, or the India as we normally understand it during Akbar's time, but per se, the women folk of the Mughal Empire or the emperors, even from Babur's grandmother down the line, they were pretty strong. Babur's sister, uh, they were all pretty active in the. Maybe they are not in the forefront of things, but best of my knowledge, they were pretty active and influential in the way Babur was running his not only his in the Samarkand area, but later on in India when he came. So I don't know whether that is in itself new, but per se, this lady, given the fact that she came from a completely different background, socio-cultural background, etc., adds that unique dimension to her achievements.
Yeah, and we must remember, as you said, Babur's lineage from one end comes down from the Mongols, right?
Correct. And
These people did have exposure to that sort of leadership or that sort of a lifestyle. While if you look at the Hindu angle at that point of time, women were very largely, they were not really, involved in the, violence, bloodshed, that whole cycle. So, by and large, I guess it's also pretty important to note that. So yeah, you can say that she was pretty much a game changer for her clan as well as for women. But maybe you can't really point your finger and say that okay, this is when something a great change came about. But you can say that waterways have acted as facilitators for women entrepreneurs in positions of social privilege, at least till the middle of the 20th century, approximately. Well, you can also have some other examples from Bengali culture also. I wouldn't want to go there because we do have the other story. So,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So the other story is from a cohort member mentored by SDRC. Her name is Junu Dotto, and her story is basically the focus is on frugal innovation, climate action, and community development. Uh, Now, to put it very briefly, her family, including her husband, of course, we're not keeping men out of the discussion at all, but she, equally with her husband, was involved in a lot of research and development in their own small handmade almost lab, where they turned water hyacinth, which is a water weed, which spoils fresh water supplies and breeds mosquitoes and you know kind of chokes waterways. So they were responsible for using this as a raw material and make corporate gifts. Um, and we have a PowerPoint which has pictures of what it looks like, the business grows, and most importantly, is women of the community are involved in this process. It brings a lot of supplementary income to their families, and there has been a lot of development around that initiative in their native village in Bagnan. So uh, that is the story, and I think all four of us, we are familiar with the story. And I would like to put my first question to Judhajit. He is the technocrat, and he looks after the technical interventions of Sustainable Design Research Consortium, SDRC in short. Knowing the story of Jhunu Datto's like products and and what they do,
Yeah, I
what
think
would you?
yeah, that's fine. But I think just for the sake of the discussion, couldn't you put that story forward in slightly more detail? Because she's not only she. It's not that she's only working with water hyacinth and making sustainable products from it. If you talk about the products, then maybe that would actually help give this discussion a bit more focus,
Okay,
if
okay, so
possible.
yeah,
That
yeah.
would be
So
good.
yeah, so most of our products are handcrafted decorative items, or also items that you could use as functional items in the house. and none of the items, as far as I am aware, use chemicals which are, I mean, everything is a chemical, but no, I mean, not no synthetic chemicals. They use the the leaves. I mean, the color from the leaves, and they have most of the research is focused on the durability of the product without using a lot of harmful chemicals. Also, the waste management that they use is very controlled, and uh, considering that Jhunu Datta has never had formal training in any of this, they have been very particular so that none of the waste, all of the waste is integrated as part of the product, and that's managed very well. Mm, I mean, we could again go into more descriptions later on.
Yeah, that's not a problem. I guess this is enough for setting the
Yeah,
context. So I
yes.
guess there are two. The way I see it, there are two very important parts. One is basically linked to the heritage of the people who are working with her, because many of the patterns and the designs that you see that they are creating with this particular medium, a lot of that is coming down from their traditions, what they've seen, what they've learned, what they carry with them, the art, the craft, the typical patterns that you see on many of the typical household items that they are making. So a lot of that is not really factory crafted. It's it has a personal touch to it. And the other part, I would say, I'm actually not focusing really that much on the technological aspect, maybe. But the other part, I would say, actually has to do with what you said, which is they're using organic chemicals which are not harmful for the people who are basically making these products. Because most of these people who are making these products for them, they come from households where people rely on them not only for as breadwinners, but largely for personal care also. Okay, so we have seen many instances where working women are sort of like criticized even when they get ill doing some sort of work, because people are first of all afraid for their health. That is true. But second thing is, they also have a separate function back at home, maybe uh, as caregivers, however that might sound, because they also choose to function in that manner, maybe. So, and they have children. So the overall negative impact of something like this happening, that is completely reduced the moment somebody goes eco-friendly, somebody tries to use green, non-invasive chemicals, non like which do not negatively impact the health of the workers. So I think this is also a big thing, especially due to the fact, as you pointed out, that she had started out with no formal training, and she was virtually self-taught, not only with respect to the technological aspect of the thing, but also with respect to the business aspect. And she made some pluses and minuses, but she has done quite well over the years, not only for herself, but also for the workers, many of whom have had some, are having some enriched lives,
Yes.
essentially due to this association.
With the export volume of these products being pretty large, I mean, I can say that it has been instrumental in providing for a lot of families in that area. I mean,
One question, it's more a question I have, and I would invite, since Shangjukta has probably, if I'm not wrong, done amongst us the more involved work with this particular case. Do you see this or similar such case one challenge, and it's related to technology also? End of the day, it also has to be in one form or the other for this movement to sustain, not only for Jhunu Datto, but for many such other Jhunu Dattos in the ecosystem. End of the day, it has to also be a commercially viable proposition. Now, to
mhm,
make it commercially viable, where you have such artisanship come into play, or when artisanship, individual skill, not only of the mind but of the hand of these artisans into what they manufacture, is important. So the moment you think scale, you have to bring machine into play. And if you don't think scale, commercial viability will always be limited only to that much and not more, and you might not have enough surplus capital to fund back into these kind of
Yeah,
services.
but let me just sort
So
of butt in here for a second. See, if I just take the example of one of the most successful industries of Japan, and you can say it's overpriced, but if you just look at Raku pottery, nobody uses machines for that by and large, because the handcrafted the aspect of that pottery of a raku tea bowl is what makes it like the cheapest ones come for something like about a couple of hundred to uh, maybe $1,000.
so
So that depends on what niche you're looking at. So if it's
exactly. So
basically going into the domain of either vanity goods, like an iPhone, I'm sorry to say, or if it's we have some very different examples of that also. So you have art by lesser known masters sold in bulk. I'm not going into examples. You can figure out what I'm talking about. And that is there even in India. And again, you have some particular, items which essentially are, which are not really into the supply and demand aspect of it by sheer volume, but which simply have innate value due to the fact that they are handcrafted. Because the moment you say that something is say a tea leaves are hand plucked, or you say something is handcrafted, say, and then somebody figures out that this is machine made, then en masse, I believe that particular industry will be harmed and those products
I,
will be devalued.
my take is a little different on this. I'm saying there are obviously examples across the world, as you rightly said, and that's exactly my observation or my point, or in fact my question to all of us here is the the moment we say it is handcrafted, then in that case, and if it is not machine made, scale will always be a challenge. That's point one. Now, to make it commercially viable, therefore, as Judhajit rightly said, your unit value, unit sale price of an individual item has to be at least beyond the threshold level, which in turn means that the quality and the perceived value, call it vanity value, call it whatever you like, justified, not justified, but the vanity value of that item has to be such that it fetches that differential premium, which otherwise, unless you do scale, you can't fetch. So either you play the volume game or you play the quality niche game. Now, here my question, therefore, was, or rather, my observation and question to all of us is, in this case, I would assume, given that it is largely handcrafted and skill based, machine will not necessarily be able to, they may be able to give scale, but they'll probably lose the uniqueness of the individual
And
craft.
they'll probably normalize a cut
Yeah.
also.
But in
So
which case, my question to Shangjukta, probably to Shangjukta, I don't know, is that do you see that already becoming a challenge? Are they able to, because handcrafted would mean that they can win only X units per unit time, X items per unit time, and are they able to fetch that differential premium in the market, including in the export market? Or is
Yeah.
there an opportunity for us or people like us to support them with various marketing techniques and ideas which can help them get that differential premium?
Yes.
That's my
So,
question.
yeah, I would like to take that
Yeah,
question.
please.
And that is the main problem with this sector, that is the handicraft sector, where primarily goods are exported, is that the artisans, the designers, as well as the sometimes semi-skilled workers who make these products, do not get the price, however much the price may be at outside India. Most of the amount goes to the middlemen, so the artisans are left
No, so,
poor. So
sorry to interrupt, Ramjita, because you're making an important point, and let me add a question alongside for you to answer together. You're talking about the go-to-market part and the middleman making most of the money, as is always or often the case. But my question, before the middleman element comes in, at the market, is the MRP premium enough? Supposing the middleman doesn't exist for a minute, let's assume it. But are we able to sell it because or without the middleman? Is the actual MRP at the market premium enough for it to justify the fact that these people are not able to give scale, so they must fetch premium per unit? So are we getting that premium? Middleman is taking away the premium, or large part of it is a different challenge, which I completely
Yeah,
agree.
so actually,
But
let me try to answer that somewhat. It's a matter of looking at it as goods or looking at it as organic art. If you look at it as organic art, then you can fetch very
that's
competitive
the
prices
correct. That's
beyond anything that
agreed. See,
you
that's the
can
one
have
question.
anything machine made.
I agree. That's the reason part of it. But I'm saying, are we in reality? What is happening is what I'm
Uh,
asking.
Yeah.
Fetching.
with Junu, madam, what is happening is somewhat different, and my perspective, which I'm saying, you can see different players in this market, and essentially people who are able to like position their brand in this particular manner, they will probably or they do probably fetch top dollar.
It's a brand game. End of the day, of course. I agree.
Largely because obviously it's a matter of value, and as you so
Absolutely.
rightly say, without machine, you really can't have a lot of economy of scale.
Absolutely. Scale with. So, sorry, Shangukta,
I
I interrupted you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to put in a point here. I think I speak on behalf of Junu P, and they do not believe in the economy of scale because, according to them, there is generally a lot of overproduction in a lot of cases, and especially the current economic aspect, because we're trying to bring down, the costs to maximize the profit. But the other model, which has worked in their case, is that they only produce according to the demand. And because at present, that is why they also produce not just decorative items, which could be once upon a time kind of a market or buy. They also produce utility goods, and the focus is on not making it a premium product, but focusing on the fact that because it is following a circular economy where waste is designed into the product and the raw material has does not have to be bought. So yeah, so that is the model that they are following. And it is not. I'll pass on to Shatrajit. It is not actually following a consumeristic kind of pattern where they're
Absolutely.
trying to
I'm only
push
saying
the
absolutely.
sale.
I'm only asking. My observation was, end of the day, it still has to be commercially viable for them to continue to do, as long as.
Absolutely.
So, is
Absolutely.
it becoming that, and can it be optimized more? If yes, how is what my observation or my question is about.
I think for them the model has worked very well, because I can
Okay.
see that there is good distribution of the profit, which for a green transition is equally important. That not only is the product organic or chemical
No,
free.
but what Shugato is asking is like, you have you look at volumes and you look at overall turnovers, and you look at what that figure is, saying over a number of years. So if there's a general positive trend, then and significant positive trend greater than the inflation, then you can say basically you are breaking even every year.
Yeah.
You know, so sort of
So that
not
that
overall
that
break
was
even, but
happening post
per every year. Yeah. So
pre-pandemic. That was, I think, happening for them.
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
but pandemic kind of.
yes, so Satyajit, maybe we could have your
Yeah, there are
views
challenges,
on
of
this.
course.
Pandemic is a
Shatrajit.
unique scenario. I mean, we can.
I'll just put in my two bits later. Satyajit, could you just
Yeah.
No, I was just about posing a few questions, but before that, there has to be an observation. We are all familiar with the fact that the Handicrafts Council, as far as India is concerned, was dissolved some time back. Now, that was a political move, of course, but whatever the politics or whatever the policy behind it, we require to remember that still amongst all of the unorganized sectors, we are speaking only of the unorganized sectors, which falls partially under the MSME mandates, and some of it does not fall under the mandate also, because they don't have any kind of automation in most of the cases. These sectors or the dissolving of that specific council did not really take away the fact that still the exports and still the revenue that is earned by the Indian government from handicrafts is quite a considerable lot. Even if we take into account other large revenue earners like information technology, like manufacturing to a certain extent, when we are doing fabrication for you know MNCs all over the world. But there are two things that we require to mention in passing when we are talking about this. that the handloom powerloom discussion, the challenge as to what is handloom and what is powerloom, has been there for a long time, and we are all aware from our own ecology and, in fact, our common ecology, all four of us, that this handloom powerloom game has been there for a long time, and people have been leveraging either one or the other. So, economy of scale has not been an issue there. And as far as handicrafts go, or as far as textiles go, or anything which has to do with decorative items go, things which sell more on the aesthetic and more on the branding of the aesthetic, I'd like to pose a question to which I know Dikajit knows the answer, but an open question to all. We are familiar with the Raku pottery, which is, I hope we are all familiar. What do you think, you know, Masamune Forge katana or samurai sword costs at present, the least that was produced perhaps in the last 150 years, post Meiji Restoration?
No clue. At least I don't.
Uh, as I said before, Juthajit gives the answer. Uh, we are aware that it is not 150 years, but many, many years before that, because neither Masamune or Muramasa are actually, let's say, historically proven. There's a lot of evidence that they existed. Their own komuso or their ideograms on the sword handles are still there, and the forges still exist. So it has essentially been more of a branding exercise for people who are buying, original samurai sword. So anybody who's familiar with the forging techniques of that, it was supposed to be steel which was folded upon itself 1,000 or 5,000 times to create the kind of steel or the kind of sword that is supposed to be a classic samurai sword, even the least of the forges, right? Now, for a person who's a collector, unless and until he happens to be an Orientalist, for the want of a better word, the value of the sword, unless you're trying to commit murder with it, is not very high because it's ultimately a piece of steel. It's a tang, it's a guard, it's a handle. So once again, any idea what like a generic piece, not something which is a replica, sells for? One piece.
No, as I said, I don't have an idea.
Jidajit?
Neither do I.
You can give the answer, and then we'll go back
Okay,
to
generic Masamune Muramasa, any of the two. Actually, Muramasa doesn't exist, so like technically it doesn't exist. Goes to the range of $1 million. So if we are producing something similar out here, say a classic Qatar, which is the punch tacker, or anything which has value to a collector, or something that might go up, if not to Sotheby's, at least to the Park Street, like auction house. It is entirely built on the perception, and I'll share the story because a very excellent point was raised by Shigato. I'll share, in fact, two stories. One being the Barupur cluster. This is a micro, small, and medium enterprises cluster, which
Correct.
I have had the pleasure of assessing. I did not actually take them through the entire lean process because it was not my competence, but I assessed their, their capacity, their production capacity, etc. It deals with like precision instruments, essentially for the surgical sector. So it's a surgical cluster. But we require to be aware that even till today, none of the production techniques there has been successful because most of the work is done manually. So still, it is a it's a handmade die kind of a exercise where most of the precision instruments are made entirely based on the artisanship of the people who are making those instruments and then selling it to places where the let's say standards of quality. I'm not saying quality per se because the quality is actually excellent. But Southeast Asian countries or South Asian countries where there is still a large number of buyers, because you understand a scalpel or a lancet is not like a knife; it sells for a specific price. So the number of scalpels or the number of lancets or the number of hammers that they make are not like any other forge where they are perhaps creating many more. So that is the kind of market connectivity, the go-to market that requires to be brought to the people, not to Junudi and Mihita, especially because they are internationally awarded, they have the correct connections in place, but other people whom perhaps they would be mentoring, or if they extend scale, which comes into play, if they extend scale and bring in other people under their own cluster, then yes, it could be a problem. It could definitely be a live problem. The other problem that there is, or the other story that I wanted to share was, I'm not going to name the name of the person, but there is a very renowned Katha stitch specialist whom we know, and she has a proprietary company which masquerades as an NGO most of the times, where Katha stitch, like essentially Katha stitch cloths, are sold, and they are thematically representing stories from our epics or any epic that might be there, and the people who are creating those like artwork, that kind of artwork, which is mostly wall hanging or something in that vein, are paid up to 5,000 rupees per workmanship. So maybe if there are four people working on that piece of cloth, to put it mildly, they are getting 20,000 rupees all in all, which of course excludes the cloth and the material and the plates. So the notional cost and the actual cost will differ, evidently. But let us say for a 20,000 rupee that is paid as labor, the entire operation taking 3 months, maybe 45, 50,000 rupees is spent all in all. That's the highest that we can make of it. And it sells to the tune of 50 lakhs to a crore, because the lady has the correct connections in place. So you see, ultimately, it is not only the ombudsman, not only the middlemen who require to be controlled, even the artisans who are at a specific niche themselves and have branded themselves as the leaders of these clusters require to understand that the concept of, let us say, shared prosperity, as we keep on saying whenever we are doing a just transition exercise, shared prosperity requires to be understood for the simple reason that if that is not there, after a point of time, a person who's spending 3 months and earning, say, 5, 6,000 rupees will find something parallel and end up doing that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, we will have one
So
of those people moving
the
around.
sustainability will
Yeah,
become a question. That's the whole
exactly. So,
point. That's the whole point. That
Absolutely.
how do we ensure that Jhunu Datto are hundreds of such Jhunu Dattos? How do we help them, or do we need to at all help guide, mentor them
No,
to
I'll just
ensure that
pick up
they
some points from,
sustain, they continue, and they don't fall by the wayside just because of commercial reasons?
yeah.
That was my actual point.
No, no, no. I'll take up from your point because it was quite important, and I'll say two things. So it's not, it really can't be prescriptive, but I'll still say something like this could be considered for things which you are treating as goods. You can have techniques like small batch manufacturing, and you can have shared manufacturing space where maybe you're having, say, 8 to 12 hours of production, but maybe four different concerns, they are pulling together and manufacturing the stuff from that place. And for whatever you are terming typically as art, or like not goods really, where you have some sort of artistic value involved, there you can still stick to your hand woven things, or typically what are labeled as handicraft. So
The
maybe
whole
this could be one. Yeah, actually,
absolutely
uh,
in the yeah, sorry, go ahead, I think you
yeah.
still.
So what I was saying was, if they could, start something like this in Southeast Asia, in different countries, as you know, say some 20, 30 years back, and if they can make it happen, uh, India, by and large, I'll say it has much more industrial experience, having been in contact with people like the English for the last 250 years, approximately.
See,
So
the point I was making, as Shangjukta said in the beginning, that I, having come from an industry background myself, or being a marketing and HR person, I perhaps automatically think of and I am convinced it's important to keep the commercial in mind, because otherwise these endeavors and these may or may not remain sustainable, perhaps might fall by the wayside and for the wrong reasons.
yeah, a
So
lot of
I would
commercial
encourage
artists who say that the commercial doesn't matter to them earn a lot of money.
absolutely, and therefore I was
Mainly.
saying that because these, absolutely nailed it. In fact, these artisans and their skills is mission critical to the success of what they make. And therefore, more the reasons machine and scale will not be the answer to create volume, because individual skill is important element. And therefore, because it is individual skill, unless, and all these examples that Judhajit or Shotrajit was sharing, the sword, the whatever, they have to fetch that premium by talking about certain artisanship and individual, and because it is recycled, as with its green product, as Shangjukta. So whatever be those 5-10 reasons, I believe that we need to be able to, by we I just don't mean us four, I mean as an endeavor, whoever is involved, including us, it is mission critical to bring into the ecosystem an a communication or a process which talks about how to bring in successful marketing. And by marketing, I don't necessarily mean consumer marketing in the corporate sense, but marketing suitable to this ecosystem, to ensure that they fetch that premium, they get their differential pricing and their revenue, and they get money back in their own bank account as they deserve, and therefore continue to remain interested to continue and remain in this activity. And shouldn't be that today's artisan and his or her next generation thinks of going into a call center and start taking calls, then the whole endeavor becomes a one generation activity, and probably is not what we, as any sustainable activity, is probably not what we are looking at.
Can
Okay, I have a small point to make here because Shubhata raised a very important issue. Is that like I was working with this small foundation at one point of time called Onudeep. Okay, long story short, they were the first to set up something called a rural BPO. So you
Sorry,
see,
what?
a rural BPO, a
Acha,
rural
okay.
business process outsourcing unit, and they're extremely successful. They have extension as far as Alipurduar, and they're working with both the agribusiness sector as well as with the artifact sector, as they call it, or it's actually like handicrafts. So the handicrafts and the agribusiness sector, and these BPOs entirely are for internal consumption. So they don't make a call or receive a call to anybody outside India, because the rationale behind setting up these BPOs by the people who set it up, Deepak Da and all the rest, was to ensure that the livelihood that comes from the BPO, let's say, generation and the BPO industry would also be like leveraged and let's say connected to raise awareness of what we can do for ourselves and also serve ourselves. We don't have to necessarily look at America or the European
Yeah,
Union or
absolutely,
any
absolutely.
other
It has
country
to
for
be a
that matter.
marketing effect relevant to this ecosystem, to
Right,
make this
but
ecosystem sustain itself.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
But at the
Absolutely.
same time, there is another point to be made, which is like if you're looking at any of the people whom we mentioned, or when you're talking about marketing per se, there has to be a system of justice. Like since Shuato belongs to HR, and that's to a certain extent connected to labor also. The labor force out here are the artisans. So they are
Absolutely.
the people who are actually the lifeblood.
They are the
But
creators. I
hmm,
call it the create. They are the real creators.
absolutely. But you see, what's unfortunate is that the people who are leading the clusters are also artisans. Now, like whichever way you look at it, if it was a tradesperson who was looking at certain artwork which was selling for a specific premium, they would like to retain that specific talent and ensure that they are looked after so that there's a let's say a replication of the kind of revenue that comes in.
Exactly
But
what
if
I
it's the
mentioned. Absolutely.
expert at the helm also, then that helmsman knows that if this person goes away, then somebody else can be recruited and trained, because the quanta of knowledge resides with the head of the institution. So you see, I'll just bring one small perspective. We were talking about Mariam Zamani, who belonged to perhaps one of the most progressive emperors and progressive people that we have seen in medieval India, or rather in the later medieval part of the medieval India. Uh, but if we go back to a person who was essentially an extremely non-secular and an extremely, let us say, oppressive ruler, he was a gentleman who set up a system which worked perfectly in keeping people at bay and at the same time ensuring a certain amount of stability. Of course, it was absolutely centralized and it was absolutely autocratic. But if you look at the Khilji administration under, Alauddin Khilji,
Alauddin.
Alauddin was a person who, in his edicts, in his decrees, set forward the fact that there is too much of money in the hands of the tax collectors. In fact, he was making a very Islamicized statement that if you let the Hindus rise, then they will definitely upset the power. But if you're asking me, whatever my religion or whatever my background, if you're asking me from the viewpoint of an administrator or a student of history, he was right. Because none of the people who were what we call the common folk or the grassroots suffered. Everybody had food in their mouths. It was only the people who were the hoarders
I
or
think the
people
end
who
of the
were.
day we come back to sorry for the interruption, but end of the day can't say stop. A very common name today is quote unquote middlemen, and I think the problem starts and ends there unless you have the value chain where the impact of middlemen, and I'm using the word impact consciously, of middlemen, the word middlemen being used consciously because something a word that we all resonate with all of us to today's audience, I'm saying. So therefore, unless you control and decide how much the middleman ought to do and need to do, if you ask me personally, this is not a forum for that. We can have a separate discussion. Today, we don't even need with today's, and in the beginning, we started with Shankita talking technology and Judajit mentioning in a response certain things. But I do believe that with the possibilities of digital media, you may not always need marketing through any kind of middleman. There is
No, but
opportunities there.
Shogato,
Sorry,
please remember, uh, this is critical that whenever we talk about the digital age, we actually are always engendering the need for middlemen. It's
absolutely,
no longer a tangible
absolutely.
middleman. It's sort of a distributed middleman,
I agree. I
and it's
agree.
an
And there are
automated distribution.
livelihoods involved. Yeah, there are livelihoods involved. But I meant
Basically, the
middlemen.
point is, if you are, if whatever digital platform or transformation you are looking at is something which you are controlling, that sort of eliminates maybe the middleman. But if it is sort of administered through some other means or by.
No. Obviously, no. What I meant is that, sorry, again, my point was simply, I'm not providing an answer or a solution here. This is just a conversation that I think Judajit might have got disconnected. But I think that the opportunity for digital, for example, any digital platform that is available today, I think there's an opportunity to optimally leverage the use of that in furthering the cause of the ecosystem that we are
Yeah,
discussing.
sorry,
That's all.
am I audible?
Yeah, you are. You are. I was
Yeah,
only mentioning. We lost you, Jonathan, for a couple of
yeah,
seconds. But
I don't know. There's a lot of outage today. So
no
my
problem.
simple point is, see, by and large, most people in India they associate water and rivers with life, because a lot of their livelihoods as well as their
Historically true.
lives are
So,
spent,
absolutely.
in relation to this. So both looking at Junodi as well as uh, you know a more historical example, you find that these people who brought about change, and this is true in many gender perspectives, since they are more or less more accustomed to dealing with the human side of the pulse rather than the business end or the economic end. More often than not, they suggest solutions which are sort of which have an emotional connect, which again sort of helps people sort of tide through a lot of difficulties. And as you are saying, however, some amount of organization and some amount of efficiency needs to be worked into the system for it to be sustainable. But
Precisely, that's all. And our role, possibly not, or people like us, we could play a role there in helping that optimization happen. And I'm using the word help, not doing it, but creating an ecosystem which can make it happen.
in
Possible.
uh, in
Possible.
areas of
There is a
capacity
small,
building. Yeah,
Absolutely.
sorry.
Particularly
another
in
small.
marketing and brand building. Particularly in
Uh,
marketing and brand building. Yeah.
Actually, the problem lies with the leadership. That's something that I wanted to bring forward because there are.
Doesn't it always? Doesn't it
Yeah,
always?
yeah, because you see, most of the people who are leading these businesses, uh, I've named a few. There are many others I can name. People from the organized part of this unorganized sector, people who have fair trade certifications from USA, who are neither fair nor following any sustainable practice in their production or any of their work.
Where
Are
here is
the
in
one.
what connotation is the question?
So
Complexion
that's it.
connotation or some other connotation? But anyway, on a lighter.
Absolutely, no. That's what I'm saying. So, see, end of the day, the problem lies with the leadership because
It
this is
does.
a knowledge intensive business, and this is one business area where most of the people whom we are working with, zero level entrepreneurs or artisans collectives, These collectives are manned by people who are always led by somebody from their own collective, but necessarily somebody who understands that because of their background or their ecology or their education. That's something that we also very strongly need to bring formal education
Exactly.
into the
That was
sector.
my limited point. Absolutely.
Yeah, because a person who's very good with the manual or the manual dexterity part of it might not be educated enough to understand what happens to be digital connect.
They might
That's
often
where,
be taken for a ride, as often these people are, by
yes,
vested interests. So
and
as Shantita was mentioning, that the very cream of the revenue gets eaten up by people who are not supposed to be. In fact, they probably add no value in the value chain.
no, that is what I'm saying, Shubato. I would actually beg to differ. There are people who are adding a lot of value in the value chain, but they're
No, I
also
meant in
taking.
the mid in the quote unquote the middlemen that Shantita was mentioning. I meant
Yes,
them.
so I would like to add to what Chandrika is saying. Often there are no middlemen. The leadership comprises people who are experts in these fields, and they have set up these
So then
collectives so
it's
that
fine.
a
Then
little.
it's a
Yeah.
non-issue. Then it's a non-issue.
No, no, no. I'm not saying it's a non-issue. In your case, also, what you're saying is correct. But
Hmm.
we have seen certain unique examples where, the problem lies not necessarily with the system but with the leadership. So
Absolutely, absolutely,
you cannot remove the leadership. What we
absolutely.
require to do is we perhaps require to bring some of these historical, traditional, and scientific methods to make sure that the other people also rise to the level, if not of that specific leader, but to the best of their abilities, so that they can become leaders
It's
themselves.
all about
That is
helping
my
them
call.
leverage the available resources, including knowledge and skill resource, to optimize their own business.
Yeah, so
That's
it's like, you go from a Nash equilibrium approach to more of a Pareto optimal approach, frankly speaking, meaning
correct.
the best probability payoffs rather than the minimum equilibrium
It's
payoffs,
the
which may
optimization. I
not
think the
get.
key
Yeah,
operating word is optimizing it,
yeah,
and
that
which
that
also would be a dynamic optimization, as it often is. It's not a static optimal level. That also
Yeah,
will shift.
that's true. And the essential point is, the what Satyajit is saying also. The issue is, it's that it's incentivized. So somebody who's making $5 a day starts making $50 a day, but and they say that okay, you'll make $100 a day, but you have to like make 20 more of these than you normally do. Maybe that guy makes five. So he has to like quadruple or quintuple his production, and that works that person into an early grave, frankly speaking, sort of. So that is the sort of thing that maybe we are trying to look to avoid. Maybe it is by and large Pareto optimal from his cost or economic perspective, but as far as if you look at his life, then overall, the process is such that it's not a socially sustainable practice, in the sense that the person will lose health and eventually not be able to do whatever he or she is doing,
Hence,
and
absolutely.
will
And
be ruined eventually.
hence the whole approach has to be optimizing, not maximizing. That's
Yeah,
the whole point.
yeah,
Or
sort of.
minimizing, whatever. So,
You have to have some sort of joint optimality where the leaders also get some sort of optimal benefit, but not
precisely.
at the interests of many of the people who are just joining this collective for a livelihood.
Absolutely. Um, yes, Shatrajit wanted to say something. Right. So I think today's discussion comes to an end now, with the hope that we'll carry on with discussing these stories, and we have hopes of documenting these and more stories, particularly featuring water and waterways and the water heritage along the lives of people. I mean, the interface between the two, particularly for this series of discussions here. And with that, very big thank you to all of you for sparing
Thank
time.
you to each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yes.
Thank you to
Thank
each
you
other. But
very
I think it
much.
was quite an engaging conversation at
Yes,
this time.
entirely.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Quite an engagement. Thank you so much to everyone, and I'm sure we'll
Thank
catch up
you
soon.
for your presence.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Take care.
Yeah,
All the best. Take care. Bye bye.
yeah, bye.